This episode is another in my series where we focus on birders. We hear from Mel Shepherd-Wells, a long-time birder who lives in Essex in the UK and who has lots of stories to tell and some top tips to share. And I want to remind you about the Casual Birder Bird Club. It's a virtual club which brings listeners together to share our birding stories and learn from keynote speakers. The next session is on August the 16th, when birder and photographer Chiara Taglia will be sharing how to improve your birding photography, both from a technical and artistic standpoint. To find out more, follow the link in the episode notes. Welcome to the Casual Birder podcast. I'm Suzy Buttress. As a casual birder, I take pleasure in watching the wild birds around me, wherever I am. In my show, I share the joy of birding. I tell you about the birds I've seen, speak with experts and enthusiasts, go on bird outings, and I share stories from birders around the world. One of the joys of having my podcast is that I get to speak in depth to birders of all types about their birding passion. Before I had a podcast, I would hardly ever speak to anyone when I was out birding, and I didn't really know anyone in my everyday life that was a birder. Nowadays, because of the podcast, I'm far more outgoing when I'm out birding, and I start conversations with people I meet. You often get great tips about where to bird locally or what might be seen, and sometimes you get to hear a few of their birding stories. But then again, when I'm out birding, it's the birds that I'm focused on. The podcast means that I have the opportunity to have those longer conversations, hearing the stories that made the birder. One of my favourite people to talk to about birding is my guest this episode, Mel Shepherd-Wells. I first met Mel via Twitter. He's active in his local bird club in Essex and often posts about his sightings. Through direct message, he was generous with his knowledge of great birding sites I might like to try, and he outlined a few of his adventures. Side note, as we know, Twitter recently changed its name to X, but at the time of recording, it was still known as Twitter, and so that's how I'll be referring to it during this episode. I looked forward to chatting with Mel properly about his experiences, and I first interviewed him for the show a couple of years ago. Unfortunately, the recording had sound issues, and I ended up not being able to use it. So in February 2022, we tried again. Mel tells us about his introduction to birding, some of his adventures along the way, and his personal challenge to celebrate his 50th birthday, to see 50 lifers in the UK in a calendar year. A lifer is a bird that you've never seen before. When I found out it was Mel's birthday this week, it seemed an apt time to finally release the episode, and my apologies to Mel for leaving it for so long. I hope you'll join with me to wish him a very happy birthday, especially as it's one of the big ones. So Mel, thank you so much for joining me.
You're welcome, Suzy.
I came to know you through Twitter, and your name on Twitter, not your handle, which is @Shepherd-Wells, but your name on Twitter is Corvid Crazy Chap. Tell me why you've chosen that name?
Yeah, well, Corvids is a bird I absolutely adore. Just your average everyday jackdaw or rook, right through to your chough or your raven. What's not to like? People think they're dull or plain birds, they're just black, but they're not. If you catch them in the sunlight, they're sort of iridescent, almost like a sort of petrol on water effect. Funny enough, I saw a magpie today in the sunshine on the feeders at work, and the colours that were coming through, the green sort of sheen on its tail, and probably my all-time favourite, which I've not seen, I hope one day maybe, Siberian jay. What a bird. Absolutely stunning little thing, but I'm going to have to go to Finland at some point, get cold.
What is it about Siberian jay that really attracts you?
The honest answer is, Suzy, I don't know. There's just something about the colour of it and the shape of it. You know, sometimes how maybe a long-tailed tit sort of puffs itself up in the winter and sort of looks almost like a tennis ball with a tail. The Siberian jay gives me the similar sort of thing. And it's quite small. For a corvid, it sort of looks quite dainty.
It is definitely a bird that I'd love to get the opportunity to see as well. It's really nice to hear of people appreciating the crow family because they are a bit maligned.
They are.
Especially things like carrion crows and rooks, which are all black and have this kind of sinister mythology around them. And ravens. I mean, ravens are just fantastic birds, aren't they?
They are, yeah. I'm lucky that I've got a couple of pairs around this way. Waltham Abbey, there's a pair there, and there's a pair at a local nature reserve that I go to. I don't get them regularly, but realistically, I have ravens living within 5 miles of home.
Wonderful.
But I've only ever seen and heard them twice at both those locations in the last 4 or 5 years. So, it's not something regular, but it's something I don't have to chase halfway around the country for anymore. Not like chough or hooded crow, which is probably one of my absolute favourites. I do love hooded crow. And you've got one fairly near you at the moment, haven't you?
I saw something about that. Yeah, where?
Holgate Services in Eastbourne.
Ah.
All you've got to do is go to the McDonald's drive-through and then there it is. Yeah. A friend of mine went down and had it last week with the American robin and the Hume's leaf warbler and what else? There was 4 birds he had, and they're all within 10 miles of Eastbourne at the moment.
Wow. Just a reminder that this was recorded last year, so don't go rushing down to Eastbourne hoping to see some rarities. I mean, there might be some there, but not the ones Mel mentioned. I asked Mel how he originally got into birding.
So got into birding probably in the very early 70s. Parents bought me some binoculars, which I've still got, can't use anymore. They're just so heavy, you can't believe. And a membership to the Young Ornithologist Club, which was part of the RSPB at the time. That's what got me into it. Just used to look out the bedroom window. But I lived in a fairly rural part of Essex called Ongar, Chipping Ongar. So I was able to get into the countryside and bird watch within sort of 2-3 minutes of home. So I was a bit like Bill Oddie, and we all started off egg collecting. That's how we got into it. Obviously we all appreciate it's wrong now, but as kids we didn't necessarily know that. Parents didn't encourage me to do it. It's something I must have said something. And one Christmas there were some binoculars and this membership to the YOC.
Oh, what a fantastic present, though. And it must have put you in touch with people.
Well, that's the thing. So I didn't know about the wider bird watching thing. Obviously, I'm probably then, I don't know, somewhere between 9 and 11, I suppose. You would get a magazine through, I don't know if it was monthly or not. I saw a trip to Minsmere on there. A coach trip was being organised, and I got my parents to phone this man. I don't know who he was or where he was, and I think they drove me to Chelmsford, and we got on a coach and we went off to Suffolk to Minsmere with these people I'd never ever seen before in my life. And I remember the Ladybird books. I don't know if you had any of those ones. Yeah, so there was a picture in there of a male and a female Marsh Harrier, and I'm looking in this book just in awe, thinking, what, these things actually live? I thought they were sort of made up. And I went to Minsmere on that trip, and we'd probably been there for half an hour, 40 minutes maybe, and we're walking around, and these people that know stuff about birds are saying, this is, you can hear this, and you can, and I didn't know what I was doing. And I looked up, and there was a male Marsh Harrier quartering the reed bed in front of me, and I literally just stopped in my tracks. I dropped my binoculars, and I looked at this thing with my mouth wide open, and it was almost like one of those dreams where you're sort of frightened, but you can't scream. You open your mouth, nothing comes out. And that's exactly how I was, and that was it. I was hooked. I just and to think what it was like for Marsh Harriers in those days, there were so few in the country. And I'm not saying every time you go, but if you go to a reed bed like that now, it's very rare that you don't see a Marsh Harrier. But yeah, in those days I was just literally stopped in my tracks. I couldn't move. I'd seen this thing in a book, and now I'm actually seeing this thing quartering this reed bed. I didn't know it was quartering then, but you know, it's flying backwards and forwards across this reed bed. And I thought, I don't know how this thing's staying in the air. It's sort of hardly flapping. I'm sure we saw other birds there, but I don't remember seeing another bird that day apart from this Marsh Harrier. So yeah, that's sort of how I got into birding.
Back home, after being out on this day trip, did you then only go on excursions, or did you just wander around the neighbourhood and see birds?
Just the neighbourhood. So I don't ever remember going on another trip like that with the YOC. Nobody in my circle that I knew when I was growing up did bird watching. So it literally was looking out my bedroom window when it was raining with the binoculars, and then when it wasn't raining, I was either out fishing and I would have the binoculars with me and we'd be watching kingfishers or pied wagtails or whatever was about. And yeah, literally just birding locally. That's all I did.
And did that birding stay with you through your teenage years and into your early adulthood?
I'd like to say yes, but no.
Yeah, so like lots of us, it kind of drops to the background a little bit.
Exactly that, yeah. So once you are a bird watcher, even from a very early age, you're always a casual birder. You're constantly saying, and you're not necessarily saying it to anybody, but in your head you're saying, that's a magpie, or that's a crow, or that's a chaffinch, or whatever the bird might be. So you never stop looking at birds. It just, once it's in you, it's in you. And my wife says, can't we just go out and not look at anything? What is it with you? But yeah, so no, lost it totally for probably better part of, maybe even as long as 20 years. Children came along and marriage and extra work and all that sort of stuff. And then probably got back into real birding probably 20, 25 years ago. And I went from just watching birds to actively, I suppose, pursuing them, going to specific places for, it's the summer, so I need to go here for turtle dove or here for grasshopper warbler. It's winter now, I need to go to the coast to get some brent geese, those sorts of things.
I was keen to find out from Mel about his big birding challenge for his 50th birthday year.
In 2013, I was 50 and thought it'd be a good idea. Let's see if we can try and find 50 species I've never seen before, because I'm 50. So my wife gave me a free ticket and said, OK, you can do what you like as long as you like. And I chased around the UK from the 1st of January 2013 to the 31st of December 2013, and I went to Wales twice. I think we hit 27 different counties. I went to Scotland once, and I was away almost every other weekend somewhere. Yeah, it was good fun. Did you get your 50 species? I got 51. I honestly didn't think I was going to do it, Susie. So for the year before, so 2012, I was mapping out where I should go at certain times of the year to get birds, and I'd written down, for example, Dungeness, it's good to go there for the skewer movement in the early spring, or go to somewhere else for certain. So I was setting it out and working out what birds I could see, and I think the very first bird I had was a long-tailed duck at Walthamstow Reservoirs on about the 5th of January. That was the first lifer, and I did all right for a couple of months, I suppose. I got through till about April, and I was doing all right, because obviously 52 weeks of the year, I'm going to have to average at least a bird a week, aren't I? And I was well down. I think I had one bird in May. I knew there was going to be a quiet period, but I thought, I can't do it now, it's not possible. But it started picking up slowly but surely as the sort of late summer came in and early autumn. And I went up to Scotland with a pal of mine, so that would have been November. And we went up for all the big stuff in Scotland, obviously. Hooded crow. I hadn't had dipper by then. Anyway, we went up there and I came back from that 3 days with 11 species, I think. 11 lifers in 3 days.
Wow.
So we had golden eagle, ptarmigan, we had capercaillie, we had red grouse, purple sandpiper. I can't remember what the rest were, but I thought, this could be done now. I've got a month and a half left, and I needed, 7 birds, I think. And I said to my pal, look, I've got to do one more trip somewhere. So we shot up to North Norfolk and did the sort of Clyde, all the, round the top there. And I got storm petrel on Sunday lunchtime, and we came home Sunday sort of just after lunch, and that was bird number 50. And then just to make sure, I went up and got great grey shrike about 2 days before the new year came in.
Wow. Just
so that I could make sure I'd gone over the 51.
So how many species did you see that year in total?
The honest answer is I don't know. I don't know if I kept a year total then. I record every bird I see. So if I go out birding, I record everything, whether it be a sparrow or a robin or a rufous stonechat. It doesn't matter. I record them all and then I log them in my book. But I wasn't actually doing year lists until about 4 years ago when Birdwatching magazine started doing a My 200 bird year, and I've started recording then. So if I did 51 lifers, I was probably 200 plus that year.
Since hearing about the My 200 Year Species Challenge from Mel, I thought I'd give it a go. I haven't really been as intentional as Mel, so I haven't achieved it. Well, not yet. But what it has done is really alert me to the number of species it's possible to see in the UK without trying too hard, just with a bit of planning. Now, Mel's a naturalist and he keeps a detailed wildlife diary, and that was another thing that he inspired me to try.
We've been talking, because we've been doing the diary thing, haven't we?
Yes.
I hope you're still doing your diary.
I am. So just for people who might not know, so Mel, last year, you mentioned that you kept a diary each year of what happens in nature. So your daily entries, talking about the weather, what birds you've seen, what other nature you've seen, quite a full diary. And I really like the idea of this, but doing it mainly on the bird side. But if I notice things, because I'm not as much of a naturalist as you are, I don't think. I think you know quite a lot about a lot of things. But I started my diary 1st of January last year. And I was doing quite well until we went to Suffolk in May for the Dawn Chorus time. And I took my book with me, but there was so much going on. I just ran out of time. It didn't become part of the day. I was making sure I was doing morning checklists on eBird, gathering sound recordings, but just having that 1 week where I got out of the habit, that was it. And I had sporadic days afterwards and it just didn't. So I started again this year. And so it's not as detailed as yours, but actually I've kept up with it all the way through to virtually the end of February. I'm still there. But your diary entries are really quite detailed, aren't they? What do you put in yours?
They are. So I put a general what the weather's like, so frosty, chilly, start, bright, lovely sunrise, that sort of thing. And then I've got a code that I use for the temperature, a code that I use for wind, and a code that I use for precipitation, so rain and snow, etc. So that's the first bit, and then underneath that's all the birds that I see. And then after that would be insects, moths, butterflies, the like, and then mammals underneath that. And then anything else of note, so plants also go in there. So at the moment, blackthorn, so the sloe, is in flower at the moment. Obviously daffs are out, snowdrops are out, those sort of things. So I'd record when I first see one of those. And then anything else of note. So, for example, 2 days ago, you probably saw on Twitter that I had the nuthatch at work on the feeders, which was I was absolutely buzzing. So nuthatch was noted, but it had an asterisk beside it, and then at the bottom of the page is lots of sort of whoopee faces. And
oh, wonderful.
Because those feeders at work, where I work now, it's a adult daycare centre, and it's got a decent garden out the back with some very good trees in it, and they've allowed me to put up what I like. So I've put up a bird feeding station, and we did the big garden bird watch with them, with the adults there. And there's all sorts, so that they could be just really elderly, it could be mobility impaired, or that some have had stroke, all sorts of people. So we did the bird watch with them, and we made some of those, the fat cake things that you can buy. Well, I've been keeping the packets, and we made our own.
Oh, brilliant!
So I made those with the guys there, and as I say, that feeding station's been where it is now since the 5th of January, and I've already had a nuthatch on it. I've had a feeders in my own personal garden, and I live right close to Epping Forest, and I've been feeding the birds for probably 20 years, and I've seen a nuthatch once in 20 years in my garden.
Wow, and you are actually near woodland, so...
Yeah. Oh, yeah. The nuthatch that was in at work, I've heard him quite a few times, but I couldn't have hoped to have actually seen one, and it arrived when I was there, and I was absolutely buzzing.
But how wonderful that you can still get that thrill from seeing a bird that you must have seen lots and lots of times.
Yeah.
Mel has also been a twitcher, someone who will travel around the country, sometimes at quite short notice, to see a particular species. I asked him to tell me more about that.
I've twitched all over the place. I was, during that 2013 thing, when I tried to find 50 in the UK. I did 256-mile round trip to see a Hume's leaf warbler, which I saw for probably 25, maybe 30 seconds in a field with another load of guys. And I did that before work.
Oh, my goodness.
Twitching's a thing I have done quite a bit of. It depends, on the bird, and it depends where it is. If I think for my personal self it's going to be too much for me and or potentially the bird, because bearing in mind the vast majority of them are not where they're supposed to be. So all they're trying to do is survive. It's sometimes it's a bit too much. The last bird I twitched was the woodchat shrike in Rochford in Essex. It was either last year or the year before, but I've not been doing a huge amount of that. I've just been concentrating on going to places that potentially might throw up something that's either A, I've not seen before, or B, might be in a position where something is going to turn up.
Do you have a life list for UK birds so that you know what you haven't seen?
Yes. Oh, yeah. I have a log that I use, and that's got every bird I've seen. Well, not just the one log, obviously. Keep filling them up, but yeah. Where are we? I think, what am I on now? 281, I think, in the UK. I've never bird watched abroad. I've been abroad a few times, but I've never actually bird watched abroad. Right. So yeah, I think I'm 281 at the moment.
But that's really interesting that you've done the twitching, and I know that you mentioned your garden birds, and that you're just as happy sitting back and watching what comes to your garden feeders. Yeah,
definitely. And it changes, that's the thing. So probably when I first moved in here, we would get the odd goldfinch turning up, or the odd greenfinch, and we used to have a lot of chaffinches about. And then they went through that, whatever that disease they had, I can never pronounce it, where it absolutely devastated them. And we didn't have a greenfinch, goldfinch or a chaffinch in the garden for probably better part of 10 years. And within the last probably 14 months, those three birds are probably the most three popular birds we have in the garden now.
Wow.
I quite regularly have 9, 10 greenfinches every single day at the same time. We had 19, I counted, in the tree a couple of weeks ago, and we've had 2 male and 1 female chaffinch in the garden feeding on and off for most of the day for the last 3 or 4 weeks. And the same with goldfinches. Yet we hardly have a great tit in the garden at the moment, whereas we used to have loads of great tits. We still have the blue tits, still get the dunnock comes in, starlings and the odd jackdaw. We've now got a wildlife pond in the garden. We don't get the carrion crow or the magpie feeding, but they do come to use the pond. They do come to bathe an awful lot, which is lovely to see.
Yeah.
We get the odd parakeet, which obviously we didn't have 20 years ago. But again, the highest count I've ever had in the garden, I think, was 16.
Wow.
All of the best birds we've ever had in the garden, my wife's either seen on her own or seen and said, "What's that, Mel? You know about birds." So she's had grey wagtail, she found moorhen, she had garden warbler, she saw the first chiff-chaff we'd ever had in the garden. She found the 2 bullfinches and the blackcaps.
Does she call herself a birder at all now?
No, not at all, no. She likes seeing the birds and she likes having the bird feeders up, but she doesn't. She doesn't do any of the birding. She's been out probably 3 times with me in 20 plus years. And she generally takes a book with her and sits on the bench and reads the book. Going back to Marsh Harrier, there's quite a link as well, because we were on holiday once down near Camber Sands, and she said, "Oh, we haven't been bird watching for ages." We're on our way home. She said, "Why don't we go to that Dungenessy place that you like going to?" So we went to the RSPB place at Dungeness, and we walked into one of the bird hides, and there's, I think, 4 or 5 guys in there with these massive camera lenses, And we sat down all quietly, and my wife said, "What are they looking for?" I said, "I don't know." I said, "What are you after, guys?" They said, "Oh, we really want to get a Marsh Harrier. There's been one apparently around by this hide." So I said, "Okay." And I said to my wife, "Oh, we're looking for a Marsh Harrier." "All right." She said, "What's that thing over there?" And there was a Marsh Harrier floating across the reed bed, and she'd seen it, and these guys with these massive lenses hadn't even noticed it.
Oh, wow. I guess they were probably more photographers than birders then.
Probably.
Yeah.
She's quite a lucky charm.
I was going to say, if only you could get her to come out with you.
Yeah, exactly, yeah. I think the thing is she recognises all of the robin and the dunnock and all. And what she says is, that doesn't look like something I know.
Yeah.
Something about it isn't right. It's moving differently, or it's a different shape or a different colour, or... So she doesn't know what it is or why it's not right. It's just, what's that? Because I don't know what it is.
Yeah.
And I suppose that's a bit like the rest of us. Sometimes you see something, and for me as a birder now, I can think, right, okay, well, it can't be that, it can't be that, and it can't be that, because it's the wrong time of year, or it's the wrong place, or whatever. So what is it? If it can't, it's not those, but that's what it looks like. What is it? And that sort of piques your interest. And it might be something fairly common. For some reason, something's not quite right in your head. It's moved differently, or you've seen something different about it. So yeah, no, I still get really excited about seeing robins in the garden, or sometimes my sister-in-law likes to come out bird watching with me, and we often say, oh, it's only a something, and I really want to try and stop saying, oh, it's only a blue tit, or it's only a because they're just as nice.
Absolutely.
If I never saw a blue tit ever again in my life, I'd be really, really upset.
No, I've done the same. I found myself saying, oh, it's just a robin, or it's just almost apologising because it's something we see. Yeah. But trying to stop myself doing it, because realising that actually when I'm talking to people around the world, it would be quite exotic for them, just as, the birds that they see very commonly would be exotic to me.
But the other thing we've got to try and remember, if we can, is that when we first started bird watching, they were our birds that we got to know. A blue tit was exciting because we'd never seen one, but we then use that to gauge something else, don't we? That's the point. Oh, is it bigger than a blue tit or smaller than a blue tit? Is it bigger than a, So if you don't know those birds well enough, you can't describe it to somebody else. If you're in a bird hide or you're out somewhere and you say, oh, I'm looking at something, and they say, oh, what is it? I say, well, I don't know, and they say, how big is it? That's often what they're asking. What colour is it? Thing that they use in bird watching is jizz, isn't it? And that's general indication of size and structure. But if you don't know the blue tit or the house sparrow or the whatever, you have nothing to gauge the next thing by. So yeah, learning your common birds is really important.
When we originally spoke in 2021, Mel had mentioned that he had run a bird club when he worked for London Underground. I asked him to repeat one of the stories that he told me then.
When I was on London Underground, I ran a bird club, Transport for London Ornithology Club. Basically, birders on the Underground. We only birded anywhere you could use your Oyster card. So yeah, I did, I don't know how many trips, but over probably a course of maybe 5 or 6 years before I left, managed to get on Spring Watch with that.
Oh.
Because let me get this right, London Wildlife Trust used to do a thing called the oyster catcher bird race. So oyster catcher obviously is a bird, and oysters what you use on the Underground. So they linked it like that, so you could only bird watch in where you could use your Oyster card, and it was basically a race who could find the most amount of birds, and they've been doing it for quite some time. And somehow the BBC Springwatch heard about this thing, so they contacted London Underground and said, have you got any people that do bird watching on the Underground? And I'd started the bird club up. I'd only been doing it for about a year then, so all of a sudden the BBC are phoning me and saying, can we send Chris Packham and that? Can you supply us a couple of teams? And yeah, so I went out and did a bird race. Started at Kensington Gardens, I think, at 6 o'clock in the morning. We birded through. It was 6 o'clock that same night, all over London. As I say, I managed to see Martin Hughes games and Chris Packham and Bill Oddie.
Oh, wow. It's almost like celebrity birder lists as well as your bird list.
Yeah. We came last, by the way.
It's the taking part that counts.
It is the taking part that counts, yeah. Chris wasn't very happy, though, because Martin's team beat us. So we were last and they were one but last.
Oh, what a lovely experience, though.
So they recorded it and they split it up into 4 episodes.
Oh, it might still be on YouTube.
It almost certainly is there somewhere, but a friend of mine burnt me some discs of it, so I have actually got it on disc somewhere.
I did search YouTube for those episodes, but I was unsuccessful. If anyone else can find them, do let me know.
Hello everyone, I'm Neil Phillips, one half of the UK Wildlife Podcast, a podcast that looks at all British wildlife. We have expert guests such as Dr. Erica McAllister on flies and Professor Nick Davies talking about cuckoos, nature authors such as Stephen Moss and Nick Gates, wildlife TV presenters such as Nick Baker and Yola Williams, as well as those behind the camera such as Wild Eyes producer Hilary Jeffkins and wildlife cameraman Doug Allen. And of course, our popular Species Fact File episodes, where we dig deep into the details on a particular species or group. So search for UK Wildlife Podcasts in all the normal places and come check us out.
Keeping notes of the birds that you've seen, do you look at trends for yourself?
I can't say I have particularly looked at certain species, but yeah, the trends do come up. And you don't sort of even notice they're coming up. They just are. One of the things I tend to find, because I keep a list, because of you, I've gone eBird now, so I don't do a written list anymore. I just do an eBird list. But when you look at the end of the day, and I put it in my diary, it's often the birds that you haven't seen that are much more striking than the ones you have. So you go to somewhere, for example, like Minsmere, and I came back from there last week, and I had lesser yellowlegs on that list, amongst other things, as well as jack snipe and a few other things. I didn't see a starling or a house sparrow all day. And I just thought that was really strange. So often it's the birds you don't see when you're out bird watching that are not more important, but more interesting than sometimes what you have seen. But yeah, again, obviously going back to what I was saying about the greenfinches and how that's changed, you know, the explosion of egrets or herons now, it's just phenomenal. It's just, you just don't go out now and not see a little egret. But a couple of weeks back at Minsmere, Abberton the other week, we were there, and somebody had grey heron, great white egret, cattle egret, and little egret, and all of those breed at Abberton Reservoir now.
But 15, 20 years ago, you may see a grey heron, yes, but...
Yeah. And also, the other thing about certain things is where you are. So I volunteered, I did a week's volunteering at Fairburnings. I don't know if you know that, it's an RSPB reserve. It's up near Leeds, basically. And it's part of the sort of bits where, you know, they used to have coal mines and they collapsed and now they're filled up with water.
Right.
So it's that sort of environment. So I lived on the reserve for a week and fixed fences and varying other things. And every single lunchtime I sat down outside and watched the bird feeders because they had tree sparrows. And we don't get them down here. And I'd been there about 2 or 3 days and they said, "What are you watching?" I said, "I'm watching the tree sparrows." And they said, "Why? They're everywhere." But a call came up after about day 4 or 5 on the radio saying there was a little egret at Lindyke, which is a bit further up the reserve, and everybody's chasing around. "Oh, come on, get in the van," and we're going up there. And I said, "Oh, I'm not going up for that." And they said, "What little egret?" I said, "I see him every time I go out, but I didn't see tree sparrows." So it's often relative.
Yeah, and you can forget that, can't you? Because when you see things that are so regularly seen,
yes,
you forget that actually you might not have to travel very many miles for that bird to actually be unusual. Yeah. And you saying about getting all those different greenfinches in your garden. I know you live, you know, on the edge of Epping Forest, but I don't think I've ever seen that many greenfinches in one spot.
I don't think I had, Suzy, apart from maybe 20 years, a bit more than 20 years ago. If you went to sort of farmland, you know, you'd get those huge flocks of sort of mixed sort of linnet, brambling, that sort of thing. And you'd quite regularly see 50, 60, 70 greenfinch in those things. But because of that trichinomosis thing, wiping them out, that just doesn't happen. So 19 the other week was just, for me, that one day, that was more than I'd seen in the previous 19 years.
Yeah.
And it's just how it is at the moment, I suppose. That again, it will probably cycle, but at the moment, I'm just enjoying my luck.
So you've got your garden and you bird in Epping Forest, do you?
Sometimes I do, yeah. It's not, ironically, it's not something I do that regular, but because I'm often out there with the dog.
Right.
Because we've got a dog, so we walk in the forest. So, and like you, I'm bird watching all the time. I'm just not necessarily actually bird watching.
Yeah, you're just aware of them.
Yeah, no, I do. Yeah, I do bird watching Epping Forest. Yeah.
No, I just wondered if you had a local patch that's kind of the one that you go to.
So last year during lockdown, there's a little tiny nature reserve about probably less than 10 minutes from me. It's Essex Wildlife Trust Reserve, and it's called Hawksmere Springs. And I visited at least once per month from January to December, and I recorded everything I saw. So plants, insects, birds, flowers, everything, literally everything. And I also have a trail camera, and I set that up a few times. So I probably visited about 17 times last year, and that's the most I've ever visited in a short period. And that was interesting, so that threw up quite a few interesting bits. So I had kingfisher there last year, which was probably the biggest shock of all, because apart from a minuscule, tiny little stream, there's no actual water there. There's no river or pond or anything like that. I had cronking raven there. Yeah, so I'd set the trail camera up, and ironically got some birds on the trail camera. I had red-legged partridge, mallard duck and pheasant, but I also got fallow deer, muntjac, roe deer, quite a few badger, fox, hare, over the course of the year. I probably class that as my patch, but it's tiny. It's absolutely tiny. It's probably only a quarter of a mile long by about 250 yards wide. It's literally a small meadow. It's got a tiny stream that runs around the corner of it, and it's in the middle of arable fields. There's a very small woodland. Probably wouldn't even call it that. I'd probably call it a copse, with bluebells and ransoms and all that sort of stuff. And then there's another very small amount of meadow the other side.
That's amazing to have that much wildlife in that smallish area.
Yes, no, it's an amazing little reserve.
But it really shows how these little patches are so important.
As I say, I recorded everything I saw there, and I sent Essex Wildlife Trust an email stating everything I'd seen. But I've probably been going to that reserve on and off for about the last 20 years. And I've probably, obviously I went 17 times last year, but I've probably been 30 times. I've only ever seen 6 people there, and 2 of those 6, that doesn't include me, 2 of those 6 were my wife and my sister-in-law who I took with me. So I've seen 4 other human beings on this reserve.
Wow.
In all of that time. It's absolutely quiet. Nobody goes there. It's really difficult to find. There's no parking. There's one tiny little sign, and it's on their website.
Yeah.
It says exactly where it is and all of that sort of stuff. But nobody goes there, and I love it.
Wonderful. Have you got any really memorable birding moments that you can share with us?
Yeah, lots. I've got pally with a couple of guys, funny enough, from the underground, who I still bird watch with now, and we're off to Wales in a couple of weeks' time for black grouse. So we try and get away once a year if we can. The very, very first trip we ever did was to Skomer Island.
Right.
And we went there specifically for Manx shearwater. They've got a breeding population on the island. So we actually stayed on the island. They take you out on a boat, and we stayed there for 3 nights, I think. And what you do is you walk around the island and you pick a sort of nice place to sit. And then just before dark, you go back to that place, because obviously it's going to be pitch black because there's no lighting on the island. And you can hear these Manx shearwaters coming in. They're calling from out, because they only approach land at night because they're really, really bad on the ground. And they nest in old rabbit burrows. Even on nights with a strong full moon, they sometimes don't come to land because they're so difficult. So they come in darkness, and you can hear this eerie call, sort of what appears to be maybe 150, 200 yards out to sea, and it keeps building and building and building. And then all of a sudden these things are literally just flying past the top of your head and hitting the ground. And when I say hit the ground, they don't land, they hit the ground because their feet are so far back. Listening to that, it's just, a friend of mine recorded it. He's got a super duper recorder that he used to use for gigging when he went to sort of concerts and stuff like that. And he recorded it, and every now and again I replay that, and it still puts the hairs up on the back of my neck.
Now, full disclosure, that wasn't recording from Mel's friend. It was from listener Sean, who lives on the Isle of Rum. And it just so happened that in the last week or so, he visited an area on Rum where Manx shearwaters have been breeding. Sean recorded this during the hours of darkness, which is when the Manx shearwaters come into land. And it's such an evocative sound. I thought it would help us visualise Mel's experience. Thanks so much to Sean for allowing me to use this recording. And now back to Mel.
So when it's all, I say when it's finished, when you've had enough, so you've been sitting out on this rock for maybe 2 hours listening to these birds, and you put a torch on it and you walk, and they're literally walking around your feet. They're everywhere, absolutely everywhere, and you can't see it. You couldn't see them before because it's pitch black. So that's probably one of the highlights. Another highlight was the 2013 thing. So me and a pal went up to Scotland to try and find these birds, and we went to the top of the Cairngorms up on the funicular railway. There's a little cafe at the top there. We'd sort of given up really birding at that particular time of the day, so we were having a coffee and whatever, and my mate looked out across the scree. Do you know what scree is?
Yeah, it's all like the rubbly bits at the top of...
That's it, yeah. And he looked across, and there were 2 ptarmigan walking across the scree. They were white, so they'd walked from the snow where we couldn't see them, and they sort of walked across this screen. My mate's screaming at me because I'm looking in the wrong direction, obviously.
Oh, no.
So we turned around and got them, and we do it. There's only the 2 of us in this thing. It's November. There's only 2 of us in this restaurant, cafe on the top there, apart from the 2 ladies that are serving. And we're dancing about and hugging each other because we'd seen these 2 ptarmigan. But probably the best trip I've ever done with them is we had 10 days on the Scillies. Yeah, we went in October for silly season, and that was phenomenal. What a group of islands that is. Absolutely buzzing.
And so that's like a key time of migration when there's going to be all sorts of birds could turn up.
Yeah, so late September, early October is absolutely peak season for the Scillies. We birded from probably 4:30, 4:45 in the morning till 7 o'clock at night. And then they do a thing called the bird log in the one of the clubs there. So you go upstairs and all these birders that have been bird watching on Scillies for the day turn up and say, oh yeah, I saw this at such and such, and this was at there, and they record everything that's been seen from the birders. So there might be 60 bird watchers in there, and then you'll bump into them and then you see them the next day. I saw you in there. Yeah. Oh, we're going to the Garrison today, or we're going to one of the other islands, or absolutely wall-to-wall birds and wall-to-wall birders. It's just phenomenal.
Was it quite a good atmosphere, though? You know, people were supportive and helpful, and...
Yeah, there was no, shh, don't tell them that there's this bird. It was, yeah, no, come here, look, it's over there, and all of that.
Yeah.
And it was really
Oh,
good.
wow. Yeah, I've often wondered about doing that, but all the accommodation gets booked up so far in advance, doesn't it? Because it's such a key time of year to go.
Yeah, we planned it in 2016, and that's when I left London Underground, so I had the time. But I think I booked the accommodation in 2015, I think.
And recently you went to Snettisham, didn't you, to see...
I did,
the murmurations of... Is it Red Knot?
Yes. So towards the end of the year and the beginning of the new year, so you get very high tides. And what that does is it forces all of the birds into a very, very small area. Yeah, I managed to get some amazing videos of, I don't know, whatever it was, 400,000 birds lifting off of the wash. Not obviously, but not the biggest quantity of species, but yeah, knot and turnstone and dunlin and oyster catchers, and the noise is absolutely phenomenal. And they literally, once they all take up and they start doing that murmuration thing and they buzz around, there's nowhere for them to go apart from a small bit of the reserve that's over the other side, fresh water, and they literally come within 10 feet of your head, these thousands and thousands and thousands of birds. And then obviously because of that there's peregrine about, and there's Marsh Harriers about trying to have some lunch, and it's just absolutely phenomenal.
Yeah, I know that they have sort of set times because they can predict from the tide.
Yes,
obviously.
That's right. That's what we did. So I looked in advance, and they had all the tide times up, and we booked some accommodation, me and my sister-in-law, and we went up, and we were lucky enough to have the bush chat shrike, the barred warbler, and we had red-flanked bluetail, but the pink-footed geese were there at the time, and they're sort of cronking and barking all over the place, and then these not go up and just, wow.
I've seen some videos, but I just can't imagine how intense it must be to be there.
Honestly, you can't. I've watched the videos and I still can't explain it to people. You have to go and do it. At some point, you have to do it. There's 3 guys from my birdwatching club that I'm a member of, Essex Birdwatching Society. Steve Grimwade, he's swallow birdwatching, and he's a bird guide. That's all he does. So he's got the best job in the world. All he does is birdwatch 7 days a week. And people pay him to birdwatch. What's that all about, Suzy?
Yeah, we've missed our calling here somewhere.
Yeah, he'd not been, and he's birdwatched forever. And they went back into last year. 3 of them went up, and none of those 3 had been before. And I can't believe you've not been, but you've got to go.
Yes, that's definitely on the list of places to go. I'd really love to see that. The other bird that you make me think of is nightjars, because you go and see nightjars when you can, and you had invited me along, but
COVID stopped.
Yes, I was still not feeling very confident about meeting up with other people, so I didn't go. But I'm sure it'll be in our future to do this.
Yes, definitely.
But we did go out ourselves to Hazley Heath, and my husband saw it, I heard it. A really amazing sound. It doesn't sound like they stopped to take a breath, but of course birds don't have the same kind of sound producing equipment that we have, so they can actually breathe and make the sound at the same time. But this churring, just really long periods of this churring, it's just it's something you read about, and then when you hear it, absolutely that's the bird. But it also sounds very mechanical, and it's almost like you can't believe that a bird has made that noise.
No, I didn't think it was a bird. I thought, it can't be a bird making that noise. It's just ridiculous. Sounds like a frog or something like that. As you say, what a bird and what a sound. It's just absolutely phenomenal.
So you've seen them flying as well?
So I've seen them flying 4 or 5 times now. So every time I've been lucky enough to see one. The very, very first time I went, I thought it was a mythical creature. I didn't actually think they existed. And we had phenomenal views the first time we went, and we heard probably 6 males churring, and actually saw 2 dancing, or whatever it is they do. On other years, we've had literally a sort of fly past, lots of churring. We always hear them, but sometimes the views are rubbish, and other times they're all right. But again, my 2 pals they went down to Arn about 3 years ago, and there was a nightjar there that used to roost. So they're the wrong way round, aren't they? So they roost during the daytime.
Yeah.
And it roosted on one of the branches over the picnic tables. So they were looking at it during the daytime, above their heads, while they're drinking coffee and eating cake.
Oh,
that was its roosting site.
Yeah, I mean, being able to see them, because obviously the times you're going to see them, it's going to be dusk or dawn. Yes, you can see the shape, you can see the white in the wings, but you can't really be sure what you're seeing because of the lack of light. So to see them roosting would be pretty amazing. But they're so well camouflaged as well, aren't they?
Oh, yeah.
They look just like tree bark. Are there any birds left in the UK that you really want to see but you haven't had the chance to?
Yeah, there's still an awful lot. The one that my absolute bogey bird at the moment is little auk. I can't get one anywhere. I've been absolutely everywhere, been at the right times, been in the right locations, but it's just one of them birds that I can't get. There's a couple of skewers I still need. Well, there's lots, obviously. I think the current UK bird list is 600 and something, isn't it?
Right.
281.
So, yes.
But realistically, there's probably a good couple of hundred that I could still get. Dotterel's another one I keep missing out on, and that should be relatively easy. And it doesn't help that both of my pals have got Dotterel and little auk on their lists. They don't rib me about that very much when they see me. But that's probably 2 of the biggest that I'm missing that should be relatively easy to get.
So the little auk, can you see that from land, or do you have to be out on a pelagic trip?
Pelagic would be best. you can see it from land, so they tend to have what they call wrecks of them. So these storms we've just had, they would have been ideal for little auk, because they're quite far out to sea generally, but you'll often get them in bad weather come into the coast. And in really bad weather, sometimes they'll turn up on your local lake and pond and stuff like that. Yeah, realistically, you need to be relatively close to the coast, and generally you have to turn up after bad weather. There's lots, Suzy. There's a lot to keep me going.
Good. I'm glad to hear it. What do you always take out birding with you? What's like your equipment, or what do you always keep with you when you go out birding?
So obviously I've always got my binoculars. I actually possess 3 pairs of binoculars. I've got what I call my actual birding pair. I've got a pair that are in the car constantly, which are just a little step down from my ones. So if I hear about something, I've got binoculars there. And I've got a small set of binoculars in my work bag, so that if I'm out in the work bus, I've got a pair of binoculars there. So binoculars definitely. Depending on where we're going, I've got my scope, obviously, my tripod, and now I do a bit of digi-scoping. I've generally got a Collins bird guide in one of my pockets. Food. Don't go anywhere without food and drink. Other than that, nothing particularly. Obviously, with my phone now, I use that for my eBird constantly, and it's got a couple of... I did have a bird app on it, but it's got Aves Vox on it. I don't know if you know that. It's a bit like Xenocantho. Right. Similar sort of thing. So you can... I don't like to play it when I'm out.
Yeah.
Because it's almost like tape luring, isn't it?
Yeah.
But sometimes I will sort of put it close to my ear and play it, because I think, I've heard that. I know I've heard that. Is that that? Yeah, that's that.
Yeah. Oh, I'll check that out. You mentioned your main pair of binoculars. What sort of size are they? Can you remember what
they're 8 by 32. 8 by 42s.
Oh, right. So they're reasonably large. Do you wear them on a harness, or do you wear them...
Yes, I've got them on a harness. Yeah, so you can just let go of them then and just have them. And I wear them on the harness constantly, but the main reason I bought them with the harness is I then got the scope. And I also had a backpack that I used to have, and it's just, after a couple of hours birding, you're just in agony.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it just equalises the weight. And I've now got a scope pack as well. So my scope goes out like a backpack on my back.
I asked Mel if he had any top tips for new birders, or indeed tips that more experienced birders might not have known about.
If you're new to birding, learning what the bits of the bird are and things like that are really, really difficult. So when somebody says, on a duck, look at the speculum and what colour that is, people go, what? What's that? You've got the book, and you're looking at the particular bird, and it says about such and such, and you think, oh, what's that? And you've got to flick to the front, haven't you, to find that picture, taxonomic picture of the bird, and it says where all the bits of the feathers are. So what I would recommend for people is to get that photocopied and have it as a loose sheet of paper, and use that as your bookmark. So when you're looking at the bird, you've got it here. You haven't got to flick all the way to the front. So when it says, look at this feather, or the mirror, or whatever it is, you've got it in your hand already. You haven't got to flick all the way to the front. So it's in your head quicker, because often you'll read it and you I can't be bothered to flick to the front again and find it. But if you've got it photocopied, so all the glossary stuff, it says on it, doesn't it, the primaries and all of those, where all those feathers are, and where the bits of the leg start and stop and all that sort of stuff. So you've got it then as a loose leaf. So every time you turn the page, you put that bit in there and you're reading about it, and it says, look at primary P4, and you think, what was that? Primary P4? I can't remember. You've got it.
That is an excellent idea, because so often you can look at the picture at the front and think, I'm learning this, but it doesn't go in. But if you're doing it as you're doing the observation and you have it right there, like you say, as a bookmark.
Because when I was a young birder, I was constantly flicking through the bird book and reading all about it, and it's 17 centimetres tall. And what's 17 centimetres? I don't know what that is. So again, what I did, you know how big a house sparrow is. So I would write how big a house sparrow is on that bit of paper, so that when I'm looking at the actual book and it says it's a Hume's leaf warbler and it's that size, in the book it doesn't it? It says tip to tip it's 17 centimetres or whatever size. You can go, oh, it's collared dove sized, because I know how big a collared dove is, because I've written down what size a collared dove is.
That is brilliant.
So you've got it on the flip side. So on the front side, you've got the picture of the bird, and on the other side, all the birds you definitely know how big they are. You write down how big they are and what the wingspan is, so that when you're looking at the bird that you don't know, and it gives you all those dimensions, you can relate it to your blackbird or to your crow or to your whatever.
That is brilliant. I've learned so much this evening.
Yeah, definitely. Well, we're all learning. That's the point. As you said, I might have got a lot of knowledge, but there's still massive holes. And sometimes when you're out, somebody will say something, you go, "Oh yeah, I didn't know it's that." Yeah, no, definitely listen. Listen's very important, not just to the birds, but to other people. They might be spurting all sorts of stuff, but there'll always be something somewhere.
Little gem in there somewhere.
Yeah.
As always, it was an absolute pleasure to talk to Mel. I learned so much, and his stories are so enjoyable. You can support the show by leaving a review or talking about it on social media. It really does help more people find us. And if you'd like to help support the show's production, you can add to our tip jar by buying me a virtual coffee at ko-fi.com. The link is in the episode notes. Thanks so much to recent supporters Annika, Mary Lee and Billy B. You know I absolutely love hearing about your sightings, and you can leave me a voice message or a text one on my contact page on my website casualbirder.com. Do take a look at the episode notes for the links mentioned. My thanks to Randy Braun for designing the artwork for the show. The theme music is Short Sleeve Shirt by the Drones. Thanks to them for letting me use it. Check out their website at dronesmusic.net. Thank you all for listening, and I hope you'll join me again for another episode of the Casual Birder podcast.